We're going to continue our journey through the book of Daniel by turning to Daniel chapter 1. But Daniel purposed in his heart that he would not defile himself with the portion of the king's delicacy, nor with the wine which he drank. Therefore he requested of the chief of the eunuchs that he might not defile himself. So as we saw just a few verses earlier, Daniel was obviously from either the king's line or a noble line in Judah when they were taken captive into Babylon by King Nebuchadnezzar. He was obviously a good-looking man. He was obviously young. He was obviously gifted, full of knowledge, and able to pick up information quickly. So he was quite a gifted man to be able to meet all this criteria. Now we hit the point where while he is in training, a 3-year period, while he's learning how to serve before the king, while he's learning the customs of the Chaldeans, in this period of time, they are given a portion of the king's table. And Daniel purposed in his heart that he was not going to defile himself. Now, when I listen to different sermons on this, there's the general idea as to why or what was going on. The reality is what Daniel has written down here is that he would not defile himself. So for some reason, he knew that consuming the portion of the king's table was going to defile his body. As I say, a couple of the reasons that people put forward is either one, at that point in time, there was a custom that a lot of the meats were sacrificed to idols before they were consumed and eaten. So one possible idea is that Daniel knew that the meat from the king's table would have been offered to the pagan gods, as we just looked in the last verse, in the last session, these gods that their names had been changed to worship. So that is one possibility. The other possibility that people put forward is potentially, we use the word kosher now, potentially the meats that were part of the king's table were not kosher. Potentially they did not meet the Levitical law of the type of food they were able to consume. Reality is these are assumptions and ideas that people put on it to make it make sense. I'm going to turn around and say, I don't know. What I do know is that Daniel was wise enough to know that there was something of the king's food that meant that if he ate it, he was going to be defiling his own body. That's all it was. It wasn't a diet for us to be able to take on. It wasn't all these other things. It was something that he knew that consuming it was going to defile his own body. And the very first words in this verse, I think, are really key. It says, Daniel purposed in his heart. When we turn over to Matthew, so this is Matthew chapter 12, verse 34. This is Jesus speaking, and Jesus says, out of the abundance of the heart, the mouth speaks. So the reality is we need to decide in our hearts our actions before we do them. We need to fill our hearts with good things if we want good fruit to come out of our lives. Daniel here has purposed in his heart. He has decided in his heart. He has filled his heart with worshiping God, following God, and following God's lead to the point that it is able to come out in his lifestyle. It is able to come out in his expression. But it starts with making the decision in your heart. It starts in your heart. Because as Jesus said, out of the abundance of the heart, the mouth speaks. So that is my challenge. Before you go and do an action, or if you're looking at your life and going, this isn't the direction that I want it to be in. If before blaming others, make a decision in your heart. Decide in your heart the direction you want to go, because the direction you decide in your heart, that's the direction you're going to go. When you purpose something in your heart, that's what's going to happen. And we're going to be seeing in the next session that God blessed Daniel. So this is something that I think we can take a lot from, is going, if we're going to serve God, we've got to purpose that in our heart. If we're going to want to follow God, if we're going to want to do what God's calling us to do, we have to purpose that in our heart, because there are so many things in this world to make following what God says scary. And we're going to see in this book of Daniel, then following God was scary. God came through for them every time. But they didn't know that before they stepped out. And there's some beautiful, beautiful examples, but God's come through for them every single time. So if we're going to follow God, we've got to purpose it in our heart.